Good evening, neighbors. Welcome to the 2022 Lewes Mayoral Candidates Forum. I'm Amy Grace, a resident of Lewes and an officer of GLCC, the Greater Lewes Civic Coalition, which is sponsoring this evening's forum. GLCC is a coalition of residents of Lewes, both inside and outside the city, on this side of Route 1. It's an honor to continue our 47-year tradition of bringing you informative events. This year, in an ever new format with a live audience and a virtual audience at the same time. Our goal this evening for both audiences is to meet the three candidates who are running for mayor, to hear from them about their plans, and to ask them questions. We will begin tonight with candidates' opening statements at 3 minutes each. Then we'll move to questions and answers. If you're here in the live audience, you can ask a question by raising your hand, and a rover with a microphone will come to you and you can pose your question. If you're in the Zoom audience, you can ask questions by using the chat function. Remember that chat is just for questions and not for discussion. Your questions will be read aloud in the order received. Questions to candidates will alternate between the live audience and the virtual audience. You may address your question to a specific candidate or all candidates. Because we want to allow as many questions as possible, responses will be limited to 2 minutes each. A question posed to a specific candidate will be answered by others if they want to with a 1-minute response. We will stop taking questions about 7:20 or earlier if there are no more questions. At that time, each candidate will give a short 1-minute closing statement.
Are you getting it?
So now it's
not
time
yet.
to meet the candidates, and we'll introduce them in order, alphabetical order, starting with Ted Becker, followed by Rick Moore and Andrew Williams. Ted, you're up first, 3 minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Amy, and thank you to the members of the Greater Lewes Civic Association for hosting this evening's forum. My 10 years as member of City Council and my additional 8 years as mayor have provided me with a tremendous opportunity to gain a perspective of the challenges and opportunities that this community has faced, and I earnestly have tried to use that experience to serve this community. While it is an honor to serve as your mayor, the job also involves substantial responsibilities, which I have taken seriously. Lewes is recognized by the county, state, and federal officials as a well-run city with residents who are informed and engaged participants in the governance. This matters when decisions are made, when grants are awarded, and other types of support, as they know that Lewes has a well-functioning government with a structure in place that will enable us to use the funds prudently and efficiently. And we have been the beneficiary of many of those federal, state, and county grants, which we have enjoyed, we have used to improve the cityscape, as well as our facilities and our environment. This recognition is not automatic. It is attained by constantly working to improve the city and its governments, and constantly maintaining an active role of championing the city with our counterparts. Although networking and information sharing is time consuming, our community has benefited from the quality of these efforts. The functions and demands on the Lewes City government have changed over the years, and as our city has evolved from a working class community to a community where residents who, regardless of their age or status, expect leadership to adapt to change, meet the emerging challenges, including unprecedented growth around us, and remain fiscally strong, and equally important, anticipate and address climate change and sea level rise. As mayor, I have worked to ensure that the concerns of the Lewes residents are heard and considered. I've also worked to afford citizens opportunities to raise questions, ideas, and voice concerns at city workshops, governments, and hearings and committees. Effective government requires that your elected representatives listen to you and others with relevant information, deliberate, and act in the interest of the communities. Recently, we have faced several difficult challenges that require careful, thoughtful, and deliberation and consideration of potential liabilities to the city. The mayor and council, after reviewing available facts and receiving the best possible legal advice, we jointly took action and necessary to keep Lewes intact, strong, and viable. Although we were all aware of the community sentiment, we had to act with what we had at hand and deal with that. Thank you. It's our responsibility as mayor to make meaningful, to have members of the council responsible to face the situation, facts and conditions, impassionately, judiciously, and act in the best interest of the city and the residents. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Rick Moore, and I'm running for mayor to put the community first. I've been called the candidate for change, a label I embrace, having been raised by a family of both public servants and rights advocates who taught me that what matters most is not your name or your wealth, but what you have done to make a difference in your community. To do that, you must become a catalyst for change, pursuing new and better ways of thinking and doing. Yet I am asked, is it too late to change things? My answer, it's not too late. As long as our elected officials, beginning with the mayor, lead forward, articulating a credible action plan framed within a vision for the future that benefits everyone in the community, not just a favored few. A plan that is grounded in the key principles of sustainable governance, competent science, common sense, and community consensus. We start by using the tools and legal safeguards we have, like the comprehensive plan with its force of law, to protect both our resources and our quality of life from irresponsible sprawl. Had our mayor and city council upheld the 2005 comp plan, the 4th Street woodland would still be a woodland with all of its environmental benefits. We should adopt sustainable development policies and practices that promote a safer, healthier, and more affordable community for all, such as repurposing buildings like the Lewes Ice House and the Armory into shared office and studio space for remote workers and local artists, or affordable housing so that our first responders, educators, and healthcare workers may actually live where they work. And we can leverage the community's collective expertise to drive climate-friendly solutions for strengthening our infrastructure, building our economy, and broadening our diversity. By actively engaging the community in a shared vision, we can take full advantage of our own rich talent pool of resident experts. We have reached a critical juncture in our evolution as the first town in the first state. This election will determine how we plot our course forward to weather the inevitable impact of climate disruption. The choice is yours. A short-sighted vision and ill-informed governance that has left us at the mercy of developers, a mayor in name only who wants to turn the job over to staff, or a catalyst for change who, having spent decades at the forefront of sustainability in various management roles, has the experience, connections, and full-time commitment to put the long-term needs of this community front and center. Thank you.
Thank you to the GLCA for hosting and for everyone who helped put this together. And thank you for all the residents that have come out and shown interest. I really appreciate. You know, the guys on TV make it look easy with the teleprompters. I think we all are gonna make it awkward with some prepared statements that will reference. I know I got into the game a little late in terms of the mayor race, but as we enter the final weeks of this campaign, I'm more convinced than ever that I made the right decision to run. Those people who initially encouraged me to run gave me that spark that I may indeed be the right person to lead Lewes forward. And as I've gotten the opportunity to meet more of you through this campaign and hear some of your ideas, concerns, I'm being more convinced now that we're a community that is ready for change, that we are encouraged, that we can participate, and if given the opportunity, we're ready to. And I hope that some of you will step forward and continue to help us as citizens in this town. Change starts with honest and acceptable communication. The city has a lot of work to do here to rebuild your trust. I understand that. To be honest in what is shared and to make easy for anyone to find the answers to their questions. Governing in isolation doesn't work. We need to provide more opportunities for real dialogue through our meetings, through informal settings, with our city, with our neighbors, and our surrounding community. This is critical because one person, elected or not, doesn't have all the right answers for Lewes. As was noted before, together utilizing our best ideas collectively, that gives us the best chance of identifying and implementing effective and fair solutions. I was born and educated in Lewes. I went away for school and to start my career. I've lived on the East Coast and the West Coast. When it came time for my wife, Rita, and I, who's here tonight, to decide where we were going to raise our children, Bodie's here, Keenan's probably studying. We decided that it was going to be Lewes because we wanted them to have the same opportunity that we had to thrive and flourish in a community that cares like you guys do. Thank you to all those who arranged opportunities to meet, engage, underscores the same asset that we have. That's our biggest asset, and that's each other. Despite where we live, we share the same concerns, hopes, and most importantly, steadfast commitment to our town. I had the opportunity to be in Costa Rica recently, which is one of the blue zones. Those people live to be 100, and we complimented them on their beauty of their country and the hospitality of their people, and they looked right at me with all sincerity and said, it's yours too, my friend. It's yours too. I hope that that resonates with everyone and that we have that collective capacity going forward.
Thank you all. We're now ready for the questions and answers. We'll be alternating between the live audience and the Zoom audience. Starting tonight with the live audience, raise your hand if you have a question and a rover with a microphone will come to you. Maybe.
Yeah, I'm going to read my question so I didn't forget anything. My question is basically to Ted and to Andrew, and Rick, if you want to comment, you're certainly welcome. Can you please explain when the March 2nd meeting was held and the agenda for that meeting was posted February 23rd, that one resident was aware that council for the second time was going to vote on Fisher's Cove? Also, can you identify where we can find the minutes to the March 2nd meeting?
The March 2nd meeting was posted as an executive session with an open meeting to follow. And that was noted on the agenda at the time. And I have provided that copy to people who have asked. And it was posted. The minutes have not yet been approved from that meeting, so they're not yet posted. They're in draft form, but they will be posted. But there was a meeting immediately, there was an open meeting immediately following the executive session.
We failed on Fisher's Cove. That was poor communication. We didn't keep proper dialogue going as a city. I'm sorry, we'll learn from that. I've had the opportunity to come to some of you on an individual level. I hope as a council that we have the opportunity to come back to you. Prior to that March 2nd meeting, there was a long process of many meetings, many hours. There were 3 attorneys, our city solicitor, Glenn Mandelis, Scott Wilcox from our insurance company, as well as a well-respected land use attorney in Max Walton. We listened to their advice. We know it wasn't the best solution. we struggled with that internally and amongst each other with council folks. There were raised voices. There were tears shed in those meetings. There continue to be from you folks and from council members. There have been relationships that have been damaged. And regardless of what comes out of this, I hope that as citizens, what I spoke to before is that we can come back together and repair some of those friendships that were damaged there. That's more important. And I'll take the heat that's due.
I just have a brief comment on that. I'm sure many of you feel as I do that making a settlement that's going to cost the city $600,000 is a bit high. That's $200 out of the pocket of every citizen of Lewes. And there was no reason for it. We could have avoided it just using state law under Title 10, Chapter 40, Subchapter 2. And I wish you will look that up and see why it immunizes the city and its officials from these suits, and why we didn't defend is beyond me.
Respond to that.
Now we'll have a question from the Zoom audience.
Super. Owen Cheevers, to Ted, don't you think after 18 years of service, it is simply time for a change? While your experience is a preferable trait, is it time to hear, it is time to hear from other voices to reflect the changing community?
I served 10 years as a member of city council. I've served 8 years as your mayor. I've learned a lot. And I think the community has benefited from those 18 years of service. We've seen a lot of change in city council over the 18 years that I've been involved. And I think everyone brings something to the table. Indeed, there will be an appropriate time for change. And but I believe that I still bring things to the table, and I'm pleased to work with the 4 new members of council, all of which have been elected in the last less than 2 years. 2 were elected in 20 and 2 were elected in 21.
Yes, I'd like to make a brief response. Many of you may be aware that we went for 6 years without an election. The question is why? Many don't know that people on council only get $4,000 as mayor and $3,000 as many members of council. When they made changes to the tenure of council to 3 years from 2 years, I asked the question at the time, why don't you raise the amount that people get paid? So it's not just people who can afford to serve on council run for it, but people who have the ability but can't necessarily afford it. I never got an answer. I found out when I registered to run, because if you exceed $5,000 for the position, you have to file with the state and have a campaign committee that reports its donations. So I'm reporting mine.
I would just like to thank Ted for his service, and I would like to also thank Rick for running. It takes a big commitment, and we've all seen, I think you get challenged in hard questions, and there's some transparency that's required as you run for office. I just feel that it is time for change. We can continue doing the same thing that we've done for the last decade and hope that things change, or on Saturday, May 14th, we can vote for it.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for your presentation. In your presentation, you suggested that there were several challenges over the last few years. I wonder if you might talk a little bit more about what the challenges were, and I would ask your opponents to respond of what would you do differently. And Mr. Mayor, if you would do something differently in hindsight, I mean, we always look back on things and think, I wish I should have, but I'd ask you all to respond to that.
Well, thank you for the question. I think there are many challenges that we've fought. Some of them are working to deal with. Some of them have to do with the what's going on around us, the unprecedented growth. And I think our strengthening our relationships with the county council and also working with DelDOT to make sure that transportation needs are met is what challenge that we need to work on and need to work harder on. We do have an MOU that's been in place with the county for some time. As you know, there have been changes in the county council, and I think continuing to work very strongly with them is an important deal, is an important situation that we need to continue to encourage. We also have obviously climate change and sea level rise, which is something we've been concerned about. We have a mitigation planning team, which has been working hard to make sure that we inform people that of the potential of what is going on with climate change and sea level rise. And most recently, we have just concluded a grant which we were awarded, where we had the Lewes Executive Committee on Resiliency that identified 14 different items that we might do to improve the resiliency of the city. And of those 14 items, the committee took on 2 of them to bring forward to City Council for consideration and possible adoption. One of them would be a letter of disclosure regarding any properties that are in the floodplain that would need to disclose what the history of that property was in terms of flooding. And the other one is having to do with establishing a resiliency fund. As you know, right now, we do not have a resiliency fund. And these are 2 topics that will come before City Council in the next few months, I believe. I hope to see them come not later than June onto the council agenda. I think those are 2 challenges that we face. Obviously, we also need to work with the resolution of how we deal with our subdivision and zoning codes to make sure that we are better protected against development within properties in the city.
There are 4 specific things which I would have done differently. First of all, the 2005 comp plan, which had some specific recommendations in it, should have been enforced as it was written. There was not a single report sent to the state, even though required by state law. And then in 2015, there was a 2-year delay. So now we don't have a 2015 plan. We have a 2017 plan with not a single specific recommendation. We need to fix that, change that, enforce it. We also need to show up. When nobody showed up from the city, except one person on occasion, that's one of the reasons that we no longer really have a scenic and historic byway entrance, because what you have is all the trees mowed down. You have sprawl happening because the city didn't defend when it could. The mitigation plan, why come up 10 years after the fact with an approach to mitigation that was recommended 10 years ago in a plan that was never made anything but draft? Why did it take 10 years to suddenly respond? Finally, defend against spurious lawsuits.
We pay a lot of money to outside consultants, engineering, legal, and we expect a lot of value out of those services. And recently there was an RFP put on the agenda, which was defeated. I think we should put that back on to see, just to make sure that we're well served there. Rick touched on one, which is the mitigation. I think we're recently feel like we're sprinting towards the finish line in terms of our response to sea level rise or resiliency. And this has been a well-identified issue. So I think that we should have started that. It's easy to say what you should have done in hindsight. The other is simply tapping in again in a more open way. I think something that's been successful, I think, with some other politicians around here is having informal meetings around the community. And that gives you all an opportunity, if you don't feel empowered to speak at a formal meeting, then let's come have coffee. And let's have that be a regular thing. And let's different walks of the community show up at those. The other is handling the pre-annexation. Pre-annexation was used, I believe, really as a tool to force, and the BPW was brought in as a lever to do that. And I think we should concentrate more on getting people off of septic systems and onto the central sewer, rather than the importance of whether they come in as an annexed property.
Thank you. Ready for another Zoom question?
For Rick, with no previous experience serving an elected position in Lewes, how specifically will you be able to govern? What is your platform?
First of all, I don't think previous experience is the key to effective governance. I think communicating with people and representing the community based on a community consensus, making use of competent science and common sense is how you govern. I think working with the rest of the council, being effective with the staffing, picking the right people to head different parts of the government, making sure that our website has information that's accessible, easily searchable, and so forth, making sure people answer the phones at City Hall and give responses. There are a whole variety of things that are very straightforward that I think can be done. And I have had over 40 years of working in government. So being elected is not the key, being effective is.
I'd like to respond to that. I agree with it's not necessary. It does take a skill set though. And the skill set is to be able to synthesize that information and also the ability to recognize strengths in your team. So having some relationships with existing council staff, having the ability to understand how that works on a day-to-day basis, I think does provide some advantage. But I do agree that experience isn't the only key.
I would just comment that not only is it important, I would recognize the experience with the staff and other members of council is very important, but the experience with county, state, and federal government officials is extremely important. We are a very small community that is along the coast, and I have been instrumental in getting the reorganization of the ACT organization put back together, which is the 7 coastal communities, which speak with one voice to the governor and to state legislators and to our federal delegation regarding the concerns we have as coastal communities. We're having to do with sea level rise, dredging, and of course, beach nourishment. And we would not have that effective communication had we not banded together. 7 small communities along the East Coast could not have effectively communicated individually. The fact that we banded together, we were able to get a meeting with the governor where he spent over an hour listening to our concerns. Senator Carper and Lisa Blunt Rochester recently held a federal hearing here in Bethany to hear our concerns.
Thank you. We're ready for another question from the live audience.
Cape Gazette story, quote, how we do development is really only 2 options. It's either sustainable or it's destructive. What do you mean by destructive? I'm not sure. And it looks like you can't compromise. It's one or the other. There's no middle of the road. Rick?
First of all, it's no surprise I've not been appointed to committees. The mayor appoints people. So that's not much of a criteria for anything. I might note that some people who've been appointed have also been removed. Why is that? Because the mayor has the power to remove. So it is important who is the mayor. But as for volunteer stuff, I did organize the Lewes Community Partnership. I did head up the Delaware Interfaith Power and Light. I was appointed by the governor to the Delaware Oversight Board of the Sustainable Energy Utility. I do know people statewide and at the federal level. I spent many years in the federal government on national programs running them. So I think that the question doesn't quite get at the essence or substance of what's needed. But thank you for asking.
Well, I would just add that the mayor doesn't appoint anyone. It requires the entire consent of the council, and appointees or potential appointees are considered by members of council, and all input is heard by at a council level. And also members of council have brought prospective candidates to my attention or for suggested nominees. And so I think that is not quite accurate in terms of how we appoint people. In terms of people who have stepped down or have been removed, I think that in all instances that has been a very fair, and it's not something that has been done unilaterally. It has always been done in conjunction with the consent of all members of council.
Well, I do feel, you know, it is, as I said before, people should feel empowered to serve in these committees. And we need to do better as a city to support the committees, both as citizens and as elected officials. We also, I think, need to provide them maybe some better toolkits to work with as well. But the mayor is correct. I think there is a consensus that happens, and that's the nature of how we work as a council. We have to come to a consensus and therefore have ideas that we can work with each other on. And, you know, in terms of how people do identify themselves, I think it is important to identify yourself and be a self-advocate as others have in this community.
Ready for a question from the Zoom audience?
From Anthony Graciano. This question is for all three candidates. What are your plans for updating the infrastructure for Lewes to meet the future demands of growth and specifically relocation of the sewage treatment facility?
Sure. So, you know, the current council is indeed looking at available opportunities. There's very few sort of open plots of land, but there are some that exist, as brought up before, that could potentially be redeveloped. The Army Reserve is potentially one of those. There are still, albeit some farms situated outside the city. And so we could look at those opportunities. In terms of the BPW, as you know, there has been a recent talk with the county about some cooperation there. I think the BPW, we have improved the relationship there, and I think we need to continue to keep that open communication. They're going to be a large part, obviously, of the decision-making process within how the wastewater treatment plant modernizes or relocates or whatever that decision would be. The thing I will say about that, though, is this speaks to how we can have more leverage and place at the table in the county. The thing that the BPW does have in the city of Lewes is an outfall pipe. So if we give that up to the county, we should get something in return with respect to conserving the land that they're currently spray irrigating. I'll just put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of infrastructure, I would echo much of what Andrew has just said. I know the BPW is looking very seriously and looking for, I think, $45 million worth of improvements to sanitary sewer system in infrastructure in the ground, particularly the largest project of which is located on Lewes Beach. We have been very supportive of that. In terms of the city infrastructure, Andrew is correct. We have made it known to the federal contingency that we are interested in the Army Reserve Center when it is decommissioned. So to date, they have not decommissioned it, but that is that we have made it known. That's a 5-acre parcel. It's probably one of the single largest parcels that could be redeveloped for utilization for perhaps a new city hall, which would enable BPW City Hall and our entire city operations to relocate on one parcel central to downtown. I think that is a very important thing for us to consider. But overall, I think that we are working together with BPW. We've come a long way. towards resolving some concerns that we had over the past. And I'm sitting here looking at press, and I think that he would agree that things have gotten a lot better and that we are working very well together at this point. We are a team, and communication has improved. And I look forward to that continuing to grow. Thank you.
Couple of quick points. First of all, there are positions that the mayor appoints without the council. Anyone can look in the city charter and find that out. One of the things that the mayor appoints with no consultation with council is actually one of the positions on the board of the BPW. That's in the BPW charter. I would also point out that the infrastructure is substantially the responsibility of the BPW, so that the relationship with BPW is critical. I would suggest, rather than lawsuits against each other, we have alternative dispute resolution. I'm a certified mediator. It's something I believe in. I think that's our first recourse, conversation rather than litigation. And we also have some options that can perhaps be part of that conversation, one of which is the approach of what's called community choice and a community choice utility. All the legal framework already exists. The question is how to implement it, and that takes some conversation and engagement of the community. We don't have to pass any new laws, but we do need to engage some new people and bring some new ideas to the table. And that's something that we've had discussions about in the sustainable energy utility at the state level.
Thank you. Ready for another live audience question? First one he sees.
All three candidates. It's about the confusing way that we're needing to register to vote here. There's 3 different registrations. One's for the state, one's for the city, and one's for BPW. The BPW questions are particularly personal. I'm not sure why the sewer and electricity and water people need to know what they're asking. And I'm not sure why we just register one time for all of you. I want to know what each of you think about this. If you do think it's a problem, what do you suggest we try to do about it? And if you think it's perfectly fine the way it is, why? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. First of all, in the city's own charter, we could use the state's registration. It's right there. It's the city's choice not to use it. So that's point one. We can simplify that process very easily, very quickly. Now, there are other voting procedures, and the reason is because there are different criteria used. For instance, if we do a referendum in the city, you have a broader voting pool. Property owners, not just residents, are included. And when you go to the BPW, they have a whole separate set of criteria that are written into the BPW charter. So the reason there are these different procedures is because it's written into the different laws. It is possible to simplify it, however. We just exercise the authority we already have to start out. When you register with the state, you're automatically registered for the city. Simple as that.
And to that end, we did allow that provision into by adopting the opportunity for the city to go to the state role. So that's something that's been done within our tenure here. The other piece, as he said, we require charter changes and again, cooperation for BPW potentially. I have been getting questions from citizens as I go around of how can I get representation? I pay taxes here and I don't have a representation either through a vote. So what I would say to that is I'm open to exploring options. You know, whether people non-residents have full option to vote, or whether we work to providing some sort of council representation to non-voters in the future. I'm open to those discussions because ultimately it is about getting people who are residents and have an interest participating in and getting the ability to vote and not making that complicated.
Andrew's correct that we did make a change recently to city possible registration, that we could adopt the state registration as a rule for the city registration. BPW would need to consider that on their own as to whether or not they would entertain that as a function. that we do not control their registration. So that is an option. I too have had some questions about non-residents, non-full-time residents voting. And I think that we've heard this conversation over and over again in recent years. It's been dealt with by the city council in the past. And I think it's time to bring it up and have an opportunity for the community to make a decision as to how they would like to proceed. This is not something that we should be deciding unilaterally. It's really something that should be decided by the community of residents and property owners.
Now time for a Zoom question.
Super. From Barbie and John Kay, for all three of you. The concerned citizens asked for a public forum to explain and answer questions regarding the Fisher's Cove settlement agreement. Yet elected and appointed officials refrain from any discussions on the subject. If elected, will you reverse what appears to be a gag order and convene the requested public meeting?
At this time, we are still in an appeal period. The court is still looking at that, so there is opportunity for appeal, and that will not expire until May 16th. And so until that time, we have felt it prudent to let the court evaluate the situation and see what happens. So after that time, I think we will have a full public disclosure of where we are, and that would be a public forum and a public meeting that would come forward. So we're open to it. It's just a matter of timing within the courts.
I'm all for a public hearing, full disclosure, and I'm not bound by a gag order because I didn't sign any of that.
Fair enough. And I have made overtures to folks on a individual and group basis, and I do look forward to a time when we can, I guess, be out from what it's being called a gag order. You know, as Ted said, I think it's tied to some legal process that we were advised. Again, this gets back to, were we advised poorly? Maybe, but those were the solicitors that were providing us the advice.
Time for a live question.
From Rodney Avenue, and my question is to all three of you. The controversy pertaining to Fisher's Cove transcends the issue of land use for 12 acres. It raises questions about the very core of governance in the city of Lewes. In an unprecedented action, mayor and city council reversed its earlier decision to deny the development. It rejected the advice of the Lewes planning commissioners, whom MCC appointed for their knowledge and experience, and it disregarded the will of Lewes residents. But what is most egregious is the mayor and city council has refused to explain and discuss its actions. It has upended the premise that elected officials are accountable to the electorate. You are asking us to vote for you. Well, voters cast ballots for a candidate based on his or her position on issues and responsiveness to concerns. Through its self-imposed gag rule regarding Fisher's Cove, the mayor and city council has denied voters their right to be informed. It has precluded the voters' ability to make an informed decision at the ballot box. For many of us, the MCC has created a crisis of confidence in our city government. So my question is, if you are elected mayor, what will you do to remedy the loss of voter confidence and assure future open communication between voters and elected officials?
Well, from my perspective, it's pretty simple. I very much disagreed with the decision made on Fisher's Cove. I'll keep repeating this because I hope everybody looks it up. Title 10, Chapter 40, Subchapter 2, immunizes the city and its elected and appointed officials to spurious lawsuits, but also in the city's own charter, section 39 and 40. I urge you to read it. It says the city shall defend and indemnify its officials unless they have engaged in wrongdoing. And then the city's not liable for that. So I urge people, take a look and ask yourself, why did we sign this? Why did we agree to it? Why did we not defend? How I would fix that is by defending against spurious lawsuits, first of all, upholding the rights of the community. The community does have rights. That's why those laws are written that way. So let's use them. They're there.
We were operating under a broken code. We've done some things to fix that code with respect to wetland buffers, fill. There's a chapter 170 is currently under review right now, and there's this public hearing on the 10th. I hope you all attend. These are attempts to fix what was broken. There's also authority that's agencies are given for these approvals. And one comes from the Sussex County Conservation District. They are the stormwater authority. If we want to look to make changes to strengthen that and the requirements for our stormwater management and the SCD, we need to do that maybe. But we need to look at what is the cost of doing that? What are our options internally, legally? So that's the reality. We're operating under a code. There's authorities that grant these. And when we voted for denial, we were provided specific reasons that were given to us that were defensible. As we entered into these lawsuits, the hurdle seemed to get higher for us because of the pressure of the lawsuits and the number of lawsuits that they brought. And the costs were escalating daily. So we could continue to defend that, but a win, meaning if we had won in a court of law, would have still resulted in development there at some level. So we need to understand that, and it was like really a cost benefit. And like I said before, we know this is not the best. This was not the best solution for this town. I acknowledge that.
Thank you. And I would agree with much of what Andrew has just said. I would also point out that one of the other things that we need to do is we need to look very carefully. What Andrew referred to with 170 was a subdivision code, which is coming before council for consideration soon. But what you also need to do is look at our zoning code. The parcel at Fisher's Cove was zoned R2 residential for at least 30 years. And so it was identified in the comp plan and elsewhere as something that could have the potential for development. The planning commission did ask for a considerable amount of reconsideration by the Sussex County Conservation District, which was the developers went back and worked on. But I do think that we need to look carefully at our zoning code and what land is out there that could still be developed. And do we need to change the zoning on some of these codes? There is precedent for having done that in this community. And I would certainly support a comprehensive look at our zoning codes, as well as what we're doing with the subdivision codes.
Let's move to a Zoom question, please.
The Zoom verse is right in line with where this discussion is going. From Marta Namick, she asks to all of you, do you believe that the city ordinances need to be changed to allow the mayor and city council to make sounder decisions with regard to overdevelopment, flooding, and sea level rise?
I would certainly support the idea that we would take a good look at, comprehensive look at our land development, our zoning, as I've already said, and whether or not what we should be changing. I think one of the things that we need to look at is lot coverage as we go forward. That was one of the things that was identified by the Lewes Executive Committee on Resiliency, among the other 12 items that were not even picked up by that committee. Those 12 items that were identified did not fall off the table and could still be considered council could choose any of those 12 items to bring forward, and I look forward to having the opportunity to bring them forward.
While I appreciate the opportunities that we've had to tap into some of these grants to use University of Delaware and other consultancies, I think because they're not vested in our community, we should get away from that and go back to having the residents in the form of committees and subcommittees look at this, and even individuals. Some of the most effective ordinances that I've seen come out, frankly, are just coming from an email from a couple of people that are noting bad code. We then take that to our council members, and we have a policy, we should be enforcing it more, of having then 2 people sponsor that for the rest to look at. And of course, there's the planning commission that continues to do solid work in looking at as holistically. But I think as citizens, I would encourage you, look at the code, look at sections of code that you feel have gaps or are missing, put that forward, specific. Maybe you have draft language that you feel, we'll put that out there to the committees and commissions for review, and we'll consider it if we think it's a good solution.
Couple of things. Let's look at the comp plan number 1, which has the force of law. In other words, when it's accepted, it is law. Number 2, we had stuff in the 2005 plan that if it was still in there, would have been real useful. 2013, that section 170 mentioned earlier was changed. One of the things taken out of it was a statement about protection of farmland. Guess what? If we had annexed things according to the 2005 plan, all that farmland that now the trees are gone and now is piled up with fill and so forth, we could have done something about that. So let's put it back in the comp plan. Let's put teeth in the comp plan. Let's enforce the comp plan, and let's make sure we have a city solicitor who has no conflict or confusion about who he's representing, or she. Let's get people in positions from the people, committed to the people, acting on our behalf. Put all those pieces together.
Let's move now to a question from the live audience. Right there is one.
Thank you. I was very pleased to hear Mayor Becker refer to beach nourishment and the Association of Coastal Towns. I'm asking a question specifically on behalf of my community, Cape Shores. I know that the city of Lewes is dealing with the Army Corps and with DENREC for assistance in replenishing some of your beaches. We too, as a community, deal with DENREC. But as you know, and I'm sure we're all aware of, the cost of replenishment is beginning to outstrip the ability of any single community to pay for it, and we need state and federal help. So on behalf of Cape Shores, for each of you, I'm asking, if you're elected mayor, would you support our community in our efforts with the state and federal authorities to gain help with beach replenishment?
I would. I know that the perception over Cape Shores is that you do have a private beach. And so that's a perception. And so if indeed there's ability for the public to use the beach, we should look at the opportunity to work collectively with our voice with DENREC. I think the other thing that we had talked about previously is that the city has contracted with Mr. Pratt, Tony Pratt, former council member, and also our DENREC guru here in Lewes. So our hope as a town is to leverage that to again get a greater voice in Lewes. I know that Cape Shores also employs him. So can we collectively maybe work towards a common good and focus Tony's time towards us as a whole?
The simple answer is yes, I would certainly work with you and try to engage everyone we can at every level. At the same time, I think we need to be aware that sea level rise and other effects of changing climate are having a dramatic effect on coastlines worldwide. We are faced with the state having issued a report within the past several months. Lewes is right up front in the executive summary. By the end of century, we can expect 5 feet plus of sea level rise. Now, I don't know if you've seen that sign on Savannah Road that shows the levels of different floods and so forth. And that sign tells you where you're standing is 3 feet above sea level, which means by end of century, you could be 2 feet deep in sea at that point. So the cost isn't just going to be escalating, but the possibility of success is going to be declining. So we have to face long-term realities. We need to plan in 50-year and 100-year time frames, because we're not just dealing with 10 years of a comp plan.
So I'm very well aware, and Janice, you and I have spoken about the situation at Cape Shores. Unfortunately, the developer, when they developed it, signed an agreement with DENREC saying that you all would be responsible. I believe, not quite, but pretty much assuring that you would be. And as you also know, the Army Corps has stopped maintaining anything along other than the first 1,200 feet coming from Roosevelt Inlet. That doesn't even get you to the Children's Beach House. So there's a big concern here. The Army Corps has decided, and this is one of the things that came up, one of the most important things that came up at the hearing that Senator Carper and Lisa Bunt Rochester had, was the need to recognize the value of recreational use of our coastline, whether it be dredging or grease nourishment. And right now, the Army Corps only maintains areas where there is commercial traffic. So unless there's tonnage being moved, they're not maintaining any more than what they currently have. Senator Carper and Senator Coons and Lisa Bunt Rochester have all been working to get the Army Corps to come around to recognizing the value of the recreational use. Not only was Governor Carper there, or excuse me, Governor Carney there speaking along with Secretary Garvin, but also the governor of Louisiana and his counterpart in his DENREC department was there talking about the value, the high dollar value of recreational use and the need for the Army Corps to assume the responsibility to help to maintain these waterways and the coastal areas. So I think I certainly would support working with Cape Shores as we have tried to in the past. Thank you.
Question from the virtual audience.
I have a request from the virtual audience, and that is for the folks who ask questions here in the audience, if you could identify yourself before answering or asking your question. From the virtuals, Eve A, if possible, ask Rick Moore, what percentage of council meetings in the last year did you attend, either virtually or in person? And were you ever asked to serve on any town committees? And if so, did you?
The simple answer is I don't know the percent I've attended. It would all have been virtually. I did attend a number, but I have monitored instead at a remote distance. I spent, going back a few years, several years, 3 to 5 years, attending virtually every meeting of City Council. I got frustrated. Now, 3 years ago in my family, there was a medical emergency that took me out of the loop because I spent that time being a personal attendant. And since that time, I've been working my way back into more engaged responsibilities, but I've also been doing other things. I decided on this course because I was frustrated at seeing decisions that I think are a problem, and I believe we can do better.
That was really direct. Anyone else? Okay, let's go with a question from the live audience. And please identify yourself so the virtual audience knows who you are.
Hello, Joe Elder. I have a question about the takeover of our sewer system. I think that Lewes is in a very unique position of being able to control a lot of its infrastructure. If we would outsource our sewer plant to Sussex County, and this is for all three of you, what would you do or what could you do to assure that we maintained power over the cost, keeping costs contained, and also making sure that we have input and that all the decisions aren't being made by Sussex County. We've kind of been, we've gotten a lot of decisions here made by the county, and a lot of us are unhappy about some of those county decisions.
Well, I appreciate your question. And as you know, the BPW had a meeting a few weeks ago where they just proposed the project. And it has not come forward for any real consideration yet. There are numerous details that would have to be resolved. And I suspect that the county council or the BPW will have many public hearings which will evaluate many of the financial considerations as well as ownership and how jurisdictional questions that will come up out of that. And I think that we as a community will have to weigh in and provide feedback to the BPW about should they go forward. As Andrew mentioned earlier, the value of our output is, our outfall is very, very important. As you know, Rehoboth was approached with a similar kind of concept and rejected it. So I think we need to look very carefully at what we would be gaining, but also what would we be losing in terms of our ability to go forward. So I hope you will actively watch the BPW's schedule and make sure you attend those meetings, because there will be a lot of input that will have to be made there.
There was some criticism to the BPW for being early in terms of their alerting the public to this conversation that was going on with the county. And while there's maybe some frustration not knowing what the costs are, et cetera, I do applaud the BPW for being making an attempt to be transparent and letting the community know that these conversations are ongoing. We can assume that there'll be continued conversations outside of the public purview, perhaps, but at least we know it's on the table. So I applaud the BPW. It's a good step towards the open communication that we are looking for, and the city should take a similar note going forward. As I already said, the outfall pipe, the infrastructure that's there, the fact that we have a certain water quality level already, and that there's discussion that we'd be willing to go towards the county standard is also concerning. So all of these things, I would hope that you would continue to participate. And again, I applaud the BPW for giving us some early awareness that these conversations are ongoing.
This is an issue that I think we all have to watch closely. I think we should be allied with BPW in terms of the risks here. I think there are some other things that we need to be looking at that people may not be aware of. You may not be aware that, that lawsuit of suing each other recently was resolved by getting thrown out of court, and the judge talked about the two-headed monster, and then the legislature acted to resolve one issue in that process by giving BPW unambiguous authority to sue, but stipulated in the law that BPW and the city would not sue each other for 5 years. Those 5 years are up in 2026. And the question is, what happens then? As BPW area expands the service area, so does the group of people who get to vote in BPW. And the question is, if this expands because of this agreement, an agreement with Sussex County, when does the city lose its power in the electoral process for BPW? And at what point does that compromise the interests and mission of BPW? And that's not really on BPW. That's on the nature of the beast, as it were, the two-headed beast, as this expansion happens and as we enter into agreements. It's just an area we've got to monitor closely and be aware that this is a much more complicated game, because every developer close by that wants to plug in to LBPW's capacity is salivating.
Let's move to a question from the virtual audience.
From John Beck, how does the city of Lewes differ from Sussex County planning and zoning regulations when a new development is proposed?
I don't know if that speaks to process or the actual code that they operate under. I think in terms of process, it's similar. They have a planning and zoning may operate in a similar way our Lewes Planning Commission works, but their code is different. It allows for different types of density. So it's different in that sense. And one of the reasons that it's been, I don't know if you want to call it difficult to annex people in or have people coming to us wanting to annex is because Lewes has a stricter code than the county. And we also charge tax in addition to what you pay in the county. So that's, I'm not sure if that's exactly what they're touching on, but there is a similar process in terms of approval process, but the code in which we're operating is different.
As Andrew said, our codes are different, but there's also another difference which has to do with comp plans. The county comp plan, because of state law, regulates through their zoning maps. In Lewes, the plan itself has the force of law. And this is one of the mistakes we made in the past because we had a zoning plan that was inconsistent with our comp plan. And instead of fixing our zoning, we ignored it. And that's why some of the development that's happened has happened. So there are differences between the two, but there are different authorities and powers as well. And that's where we need to start, get our own house in order, and then participate in the process, because when we identify things for annexation, it gives us more leverage.
Well, we do, the county does have their own regulations, but they do have a planning commission just as we do. So they do look at it separately. However, I would suggest that all zoning, all land in Sussex County was originally zoned AR1, which means as a matter of right, it can be developed as farmland, or it can develop 2 houses per acre as a matter of right. And the only thing you have to go to the county for is if you want to change that zoning to a higher density level. So it's quite different than what we have. Our zoning is specific by area. So we have R2, R1, or whatever, and that makes a big difference in what can be developed. So I think that's an important distinction to be made between the county and what we have. And other than that, I do think our zoning needs to be reviewed, as I mentioned earlier. So.
And now a question from our live audience.
Let me try again. Great. Hi, my name is Perrin Smith, and this question is to all 3 of our panel here. I really feel that Lewes is at a crossroads. I've lived in this area now for over 35 years. I've lost track now, but I really feel Lewes is at a crossroads. We have less land to be developed, and all of it is sensitive land. We have higher pressure for development. There's a tremendous amount of money to be had, and a lot of people want to move here. I want to know from each of you what your priority is so that we do not go through another debacle of Fisher Cove. What would be your priority if elected mayor to make sure we don't have a repeat?
Well, I hope I'm being clear. I think we start with our comprehensive plan. We start with enforcing it. We start with being clear. We start with laying out the areas we want to protect. I think we also ought to be looking at a moratorium on major developments for the foreseeable future until we get our comprehensive plan straight. And let's get back on the 5-year track we were on. We ought to be dealing with a 2025 plan, and we ought to be laying out clearly, having meetings with the community, engaging you all in a process very much like happened back in the 90s when Lewes did have a consensus. That consensus was put in place and it would have been very effective. And I know many of you have described to me participating in that process, and we need to renew that process of engagement and hearing and listening and acting on your concerns to codify them and really enforce them. It doesn't matter if you have a plan if you don't use it. And it doesn't matter that it has the force of law if you don't enforce it.
I would note that our comprehensive plan is undergoing a comprehensive review right now. And we had a workshop last week at the library, at the Rollins Center, where the consultant that we've hired to work on our comp plan presented several things that we have talked about. When we came up, we have been submitting an annual letter of updating what has gone on. But as council looked at the comp plan right now that is in existence, we recognize that there have been substantial changes that have occurred since the comp plan was developed in 16, and that we needed to not completely rewrite it, but we needed to update it substantially. And we couldn't do that without bringing in more comprehensive consulting opportunities for people to look at it. So there was a workshop. I hope some of you, or perhaps all of you, attended it. I know it was very well attended early on in the evening, but it was a 3-hour period when there was public comment received. And that is only the beginning of it. There will be more workshops going on as we go forward. I do think not only do we need to look at the comp plan, but it's very critical that we look at our zoning ordinances. Our zoning ordinances and what we're working on with the subdivision code that will be will help define some of how land use goes on going forward. Keep in mind that Lewes is only 4 square miles, and we very much sit on the edge of what the county can approve, and we have to maintain the working relationship with the county as well.
So some of what they've said before, I agree with in terms of some of what we're doing is reviewing the code that now and making changes there. The one thing I think we should try differently, we've tried in the past, is I think we often have vilified these developers, and we've not tried to develop healthy relationships to understand what their ultimate goals are. We assume that it's money, maybe it is, but I think if we can get dialogue in reviewing things like annexation, understanding, why would someone to come into Lewes? It's opening up dialogues there. Realtors, same thing. What are they seeing? Using those resources and not holding them necessarily at arm's length, but having healthy relationships there. The other is, I think when we sound the alarm for things that are going on around, we immediately go to Mark Schaefer, we go to Ernie, or we go to Steve. We need to understand that those folks need votes and support as well, and for their constituency and through their other representatives in our form of government that we have. So giving them help and understanding from our politicians, how can we as citizens help them in what we want to achieve here at a local level? What support and help can we provide you rather than just sounding the alarm every time that we see that there's an issue on the horizon?
Time now.
First of many questions from Alicia Jones. One at a time. Why has building and development within Lewes proper exceeded the residents' public opinion against development? Why does Mariners Retreat exempt from setback rules? Sure. Why is building and development within, I'm reading them like they're written, within Lewes proper exceeded the residents' public opinion against development? Why does Mariners Retreat exempt from the setback rules?
Mariners Retreat, what has become Mariners Retreat, was zoned R2. I'm not aware of them being exempted from setbacks. So that would be something I would need to check with our building officials on. So I'm not aware of that, of an exception having been made there. It was nothing that was brought before council. So I'd have to check on that. But in terms of development, what has been approved in terms of development is what the zoning allows, or unless someone has come forward requesting a change in zoning.
I don't have a whole lot to add to that other than I've had questions about Mariners Retreat. I've actually measured the distance from the corner of the building right up front and the lot line. It's a lot less than what I understand the city allowed. Members of council know I emailed several of you. I also emailed the building inspector. The answer I got back is it conforms. I find it a deep mystery to know how that's possible, but who am I?
Again, unfortunately, that one predated me in terms of the approval of that particular. In terms of others, as the mayor said, there is a code. So those that have been approved have sat on there. With respect to some of the zoning changes, I was the lone vote on the Lewes dairy change because I felt it was important to keep some of the industrial zoning for some of the mix and the opportunities that some of you have brought up tonight. Unfortunately, some of our zones are disappearing around Lewes, and they have been turned to residential in the past. So we need to pay attention to that and maybe redevelop some things if we're willing to establish new zones.
And now a question from the live audience.
Ms. Kathy Harvat, and full disclosure, Rick is my husband. But I have a question that's very pertinent to my life and I think the lives of everyone in this room. 3 years ago, as Rick said, we had an emergency. It was me. I underwent an aortic dissection and I nearly died. I was told by several doctors here, including my own, that had I been here and not in Baltimore, I would have died. What are we doing? It takes, when you move here, and this is part of the infrastructure, is the emergency medical services or medical services at all. When you move here, it takes months to get on a doctor's list. What are we, as a city, how can we fix this problem? We're medically underserved. I have talked to a number of people who've been offered jobs here, young people who cannot take them because they are in debt to student loans for $300,000 or $400,000 and can't afford to live here. How are we going to fix some of this to all of you?
Lucky me. Now, this was one, you make a good point. And my wife has brought this one up, is we don't have, some parts of the state, they do have these things included that developers are required to have that fill in with the fire department to make sure that you're not exceeding capacity. We don't currently have those, so good idea. Maybe we should look to include that as a disclosure. Maybe realtors should be making disclosures about how many doctors per 10,000 there are. Again, those are all ideas we can bring up. In terms of recruiting new folks here, I know that that it is going to be a housing issue, and if we want to bring affordable housing into Lewes, it will have effects on all of our property values. We're open to those opportunities, but we have to embrace them as a community. We brought in some workforce housing through new development and some in the form of Donovan Smith. Hopefully we can continue to develop that property and keep it affordable housing in the future.
I sit on the Healthcare Commission representing Sussex County. Sussex County is underserved. However, I think we have to give hats off to BB. They've done a great job of expanding their services here. It is still a critical shortage. David Tam has done a great job as the new executive at BB. And I believe he's recruited in excess of 60 positions in the tenure that he's been here, which is just over 15 months, or excuse me, 2 years. And I think that he's to be credited for that. We still have a great shortage of physicians in the area. It is true all over Sussex County, but BB has stepped up to the plate. And I think I recognize that, and I'm very glad that your health has been stabilized and you were able to get the medical care that you needed where you were in DC, I assume. But I do believe that the Healthcare Commission is working. I would also note that the state has not only do we have a federal loan repayment program that does recognize physicians, but also the state has set up a state loan repayment program for medical practitioners. And that's both physicians and as highly skilled nurse practitioners and things like that. So the state is trying to do that. That this is a brand new program that is just being implemented at the state level. And that I have hats off to Senator Lopez and the rest of the legislature for adopting that and putting money into that program. So it is a concern that we all have. And on Thursday morning, I will participate in the Healthcare Commission's meeting again. And it is something that we work on regularly.
Of course, a big solution is affordable housing, where we can bring in the medical personnel. But I think we can also explore some other possibilities, sitting down with BB, engaging with them in our planning process. I also understand that BB is actually working with some developers. Now, I want to make clear that I think working with developers can be a good thing if we're working on sustainable development together. And I want to mention, if you go back in time, the Greater Lewes Plan, I think it was called, was put out, it's going back 20, 30 years ago now. The Greater Lewes Plan was put out by a number of our local developers. They had some ideas that actually looked not bad at all, but we didn't pursue that. So I want to mention, someone asked me earlier, why do I see destruction versus sustainability? Because there are two different kinds of development. And what we need to do is focus on what's sustainable, because if it's not sustainable, it is going to be taking our planet down and us with it. That's called sea level rise, climate turbulence, and so forth. We need to plan together and implement a wise plan that will help us bring in medical services and all other services in a viable way where the people delivering those services can afford to live here. It's not just lower income occupations. People in middle and upper income occupations are having trouble affording to live here.
Well, I thought we might have time for another question from one audience or the other, but we actually are at time. So I'm going to give the candidates a chance to give a 1-minute closing statement, and then I'll tell you a little information, and then we'll call it an evening. So let's go in reverse alphabetical order for the closing statement, which would put you up first, Andrew.
Again, thanks to everyone who organized the event and who have participated tonight. For those who haven't been able to ask their questions due to time or perhaps shyness, feel free to reach out to me. I'll go ahead and give you my number. It's 302-841-3755. You can find it on the city's website. I again applaud both candidates, one for their service to the community, their willingness to step forward. I know it's, in my own experience, it's been a busy time. So I would encourage everyone to vote. As I said before, it's time for change. I think the consensus that I've got going around to people is we do continue to need to change as a community, listen to each other, not talking past each other. And I think with the human capital that we have here, our greatest asset truly is our residents. We need to be good stewards of that. And we also need to not waste talents that we're given in life. And that's everyone here. Thank you. Please vote.
Okay, Rick.
I would echo Andrew's comments. Thank you all. Thank you to both my fellow candidates. I think this has been a very useful forum. We need to continue the outreach and the engagement. We need to involve the community. We need to put the community first. That to me is essential. If we can get your consensus and get your engagement and make sure that we're acting on it and carrying out and defending it, then I think we're going to make some progress. Definitely be sure to get out and vote. My website is more4lewes, 4 is a number, .net.org.com. It'll all get you to the same place, and you can reach me through the phone numbers there, or you can see me when I'm out walking the dog. That's the other mayor of Lewes, the unofficial.
Yes, Ted.
Well, I too want to echo thanks to the Greater Lewes Community Village, our Community Association, for their putting this together. It's a great opportunity for everyone to have a chance to hear what's going on. And interesting, I think there were nearly 180 participants on the web, so that's great. And I echo thanking Andrew and Rick for their performance, for their involvement in the campaign and the discussion here tonight. I would encourage all of you to think seriously about volunteering for a city committee. Come to meetings. Come to we make appointments. City council makes appointments, but we need to hear from you of what interests you have and what you would like to get involved in. We do have opportunities that can come up from time to time, and we would encourage you. And I look around this audience and I see several people who have worked on committees for a number of years, some of whom have stepped down because of various reasons, and some of whom have stepped up. So I thank you for your engagement. And the community is better because of all the volunteerism that we have. And as has been said, the capital involvement of people volunteering to serve in this community makes this community as special as it is. However, there is a lot of responsibility associated with being a member of a committee. And you need to know what those are, and you need to be prepared to work. And I don't mean that work in physical labor. I mean that intellectually, and we have a great deal of opportunity here. So I thank you again, and please do get out and vote. I can be reached at City Hall, or I can be reached at 202-255-4675. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone in both audiences, for your attention tonight and for your courtesy. Thank you to all the on-site volunteers, Karen, Rich, Dan, Rob, and Doug, with special thanks to the Lewes Library for this beautiful setting, and special thanks to librarian guru Rebecca Lowe. We would have been lost without your technical skills tonight.
Yeah, she's good.
Sign up to be on our mailing list or email us at greaterlewis@gmail.com, and we'll send you a link to the recorded session that we did tonight. Also, check our Facebook page. The recording of tonight's event will also be there. Any cash contributions to our treasury will be appreciated. There is a box at the back of the room. Oh, for only $10, you can actually be a member of GLCC and keep up with what's going on in our community. The other thing on the back table is if you're not able to vote in person, there's applications for an absentee ballot. If you fill them out tonight, we can return them to the election board for you. But finally, most importantly, vote on Saturday, May 14th between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. because we're all part of this community and we're all part of making it work for us. Thank you very much.